Welcome to Conducting Research with the Indigenous Digital Archive, or IDA Treaties Explorer web portal. You can access the portal using DigiTreaties.org as seen in the link below. The Indigenous Digital Archive's Treaty Explorer, or DigiTreaties.org, was created by the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in partnership with the U.S. National Archives Office of Innovation and National Archives Foundation. Thanks to a generous anonymous donor, the U.S. National Archives conserved and digitized the 374 ratified Indian treaties in its holdings. The Indigenous Digital Archive is a project of the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in collaboration with the New Mexico State Library, the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center, and the New Mexico History Museum. My name is Professor Sherri Nicole Thomas, and I'm the Associate Dean of Institutional Climate and Equity at the University of New Mexico School of Law. This is Indian Treaties Research Session 3, aired on October 12, 2020. The previous two sessions, Treaties What Are They? And Indian Treaties History, were held on December 10th and 11th of 2019. Today's session, Conducting Research with the Treaties Explorer web portal, available at DigiTreaties.org, will provide you with guidance and instruction on using the Indigenous Digital Archive for treaty research. In Session 3, we will review what we learned in Sessions 1 and 2 regarding core concepts around federal Indian law and Indian treaties. We'll also go over the scope of the Indigenous Digital Archive. Once we have reviewed our understanding of the nexus between federal Indian law and Indian treaties, and understand the scope of the Indigenous Digital Archive, we will be ready to conduct research within the IDA Treaties Explorer. We'll go over useful definitions, website layout, and how to search. At the conclusion of this session, the audience should have an understanding of the content scope of the IDA Treaties Explorer portal, understand the importance and impact of access to scans of original historical documents, and be able to effectively conduct research within the scope of the database. Let's begin our review of federal Indian law and Indian treaties. We do this so that we understand what the implications are between the existence of treaties between the United States and the indigenous people of North America. To analyze this question, let's begin by reviewing the basic concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty is the inherent right to or power to govern in a specific jurisdiction, and it can be over a specific people or a specific landmass. Tribal sovereignty, therefore, is the sovereignty expressed through the lens of an individual tribal entity's history and culture. The exercise of tribal sovereignty in the context of the United States is complicated. It's complicated because tribes within the U.S. have to be federally recognized and therefore are governed by federal Indian law within the United States, and at the same time are trying to express sovereignty over their own lands and peoples by creating their own tribal law. Expression of tribal sovereignty within the United States is further complicated due to the ever-changing federal Indian policies of the federal government. This federal Indian policy timeline represents decades and decades of changing policies that the indigenous peoples of North America have had to endure in their relationship with the United States. In the beginning, the colonies and then the United States treated Indian nations as independent sovereigns. And now there's a complex relationship where the sovereignty of indigenous nations cannot be expressed unless that tribe has received recognition through the United States federal government. Federal recognition automatically brings with it the complications of federal Indian law, and that extends to Indian treaties. For instance, although federally recognized tribes are extra-constitutional, they are still bound to a relationship that involves the plenary authority of Congress to decide whether or not that tribe exists within the eyes of the United States. And if they do receive that status, the contemplation of them existing under constitutional law outside of the Indian Taxation Clause did not exist when the U.S. Constitution was created. The irony is that while being extra-constitutional entities, federally recognized tribes are subject to the branches of government that are created by the Constitution. The legislature has plenary authority to decide whether or not tribes exist or do not. The executive branch has the authority to create treaties and agreements with them, in addition to executing laws that are applicable to federal Indian tribes, as well as overseeing any funds, lands, or other properties that are in trust in the name of tribes. The legislative and executive branches of the U.S. government are supposed to be held in check by a couple of things. First is their fiduciary duty as trustees to always act in the best interest of the tribes who are the beneficiaries of this trust. Secondly, the actions taken by Congress and the executive branch are reviewable by the judicial branch created by the Constitution. Even though the relationships of tribal peoples in North America started out with other nations on a sovereign-to-sovereign basis, with the creation of the United States federal government, the Constitution, and the ever-changing policies regarding Indians, we have now come to the point to where ratified Indian treaties have authority equivalent to that of a federal statute, again underlying Congress's plenary authority to affect the lives of Indian people. Even with all of these complexities, tribes still make sure that their treaty rights are enforced. With over 200 treaties still in effect, even though Congress still has plenary authority, tribes today are more vigilant in the protection of their rights that they still have and are active lobbyists to make sure that they retain any sovereign authority that they have and will extend it when possible. With our foundational knowledge regarding treaties refreshed, we're almost ready to start searching within the IDA Treaties Explorer portal. However, there is some terminology that would be helpful to you as I go through the website and how to use it. Okay, let's start off with attribution. As I go through the website, you'll notice as my cursor moves over and selects different types of information, the word attribution will pop up along with a source name. Because the DigiTreaties website is actually a culmination of information from various sources, efforts have been made to ensure that all of the documents have the original sources cited so that you know where the information compiled in the IDA Treaties Explorer website originated from. Even though treaty is the word of the day, the term cession will be seen over and over again in the Treaties Explorer. A cession is the transfer of land from ownership of one party to another, usually by treaty. Within the website, you will see that many tribes are listed on cession lists. These cession lists identify lands that have been ceded by a particular tribe, identified as ancestral tribal lands, or identify land that is going to be reserved for a particular tribe. You will also see executive orders referenced over and over. An executive order is a power used by the office of the president or the executive and administrative branches of the government to execute laws or enforce them. As we learn to use the website, you will notice that there are historical and modern names used for tribal peoples. In this context, the historical names refer to the names used in treaties that were actually designated by the United States government officials so that they could identify different indigenous groups. You'll notice that some of the tribal names have terms like Eastern, Southern, Western, or Northern in the beginning of them to help identification. Usually these terms were arbitrary, but were related to a significant body of water or river, or even a mountain range. If you see a tribe's name that's designated as modern, that means that that tribal name came off of the Indian entities recognized and eligible to receive services from the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs. This list is compiled yearly by the Department of the Interior via the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The final term that will aid you in effectively researching treaties on this website is the statutes at large. The statutes at large is the official chronological compilation of the United States enacted laws. Think of them as a snapshot in time of language used in a particular law when it was passed. You will see citations to this resource as well as to executive orders in the session list. I will point them out as we go along in the tutorial. All right, we're almost set to start researching. But before we do that, we need to clarify what the scope of this particular database is. Even though we have focused on the 374 ratified Indian treaties that are in this database, there are other things like the session lists that I have referenced before and other documents related to treaties or the session lists. You'll notice that the dates for the treaties run from 1722 to 1869, but that within the database itself, You will see dates that run from 1722 to 1930. Those later dates are attributed to the additional documents outside of the treaties, such as the cession lists. While the emphasis has been on the treaty documents, what's really important is what the treaties are about, those transfers of land. To that extent, the digitreaties.org site has many maps available. These maps depict the transfer of lands that are taking place within the treaty or within an individual cession. During the tutorial, I will show you a map of the entire United States, and you will see that there is a significant area of the United States that is not covered. That is because there are no treaties that have been added to this website that cover those lands. In addition, the Eastern Seaboard land transfers were actually not conducted between the United States and indigenous peoples, but from other European countries like France, Spain, and England. For more information about the scope of the digitreaties.org website, make sure you take a look at the About link that's on top of the page. I've also provided a link to that page in this slide. Okay, it's finally time to explore the IDA Treaties portal. Remember, you can get there through digitreaties.org. Now that we're ready to go live on digitreaties.org, let's start by looking at the upper right-hand corner of the page at the Resources, About, and Guide links. We'll begin with Resources. Once you click on Resources, you'll be taken to a page that gives us an overview of everything that the guides contain, an introduction to the treaties, curriculum units, books, and other resources that can aid you with your treaty research. The About page tells you more about the scope of what is currently in the database, and it will be updated as changes are made. This page also gives you information regarding affiliated organizations and the grants that help bring about this website. The guide link is still under development. It will have all 3 treaty sessions and other research resources. To return to the main page, you can click on IDA Treaties Explorer or your back button on your browser. You'll notice that there are 4 options in the orange box to choose from. You have treaties, sessions, tribes, and places. You can see the highlighting of the 374 ratified Indian treaties, and you can either click on treaties, as I did here, or on the box that says See Treaties. You'll see that there are a total of 1,581 resources that include more than the 347 treaties and contain things like cover sheets for the treaties. You'll notice the date ranges began on August 13th, 1722 and run to December 1st, 1930. Filtering by date, especially if you know the date of a treaty or the date range of a treaty, seems like a no-brainer. However, I would caution you about using this feature in this site at this time. I will demonstrate how it works, and you will understand why as we go through the demonstration. To change the date range, all you have to do is click in the box, and you'll see there's an automatic calendar that pops up. However, instead of using the calendar, I recommend that you manually change the numbers to the dates that you want. It's much faster than having to scroll through the years and months that are provided for you. As I change the upper limit date to January 1st, 1745, please remember that number, 1,581 documents. Once I actually finish the search, you'll notice that total goes down to 632 documents. The results on the page have not changed at the beginning because these results are automatically sorted by date with the earliest date coming first. However, if you look at the bottom of the page, you'll see that it goes to 53 pages, and if you click on that 53rd page, you'll notice the dates are in the 1800s, even though my upper limit range was 1745. While the filter does limit the results that you get back, you would be better off using the date range in addition to the names of the tribe or any other information that you might have. In order to reset your search, to go back to the beginning to see the full set in chronological order, you can either click your back button or click on treaties as I did here, and you can see that the date range reset to the original dates, and my total number of documents that have been retrieved is 1,581. And now the number of pages retrieved is 132. Indicators at the top and the bottom of the screen really help researchers understand how much browsing or how much searching they're going to have to do within any given research session. All right, let's conduct a search. Let's look for a treaty regarding the Mescalero Apaches. I thought about searching for Muscalero in the title because whenever you're using search terms, you would like to use very unique terms so that you can limit your results. Instead, I changed my mind and decided to look for ratified treaties. And since there's a tribe field, I decided to enter Mescalero. Notice I got no results. So then I took out ratified and just left in Mescalero to see what my results would be. And I didn't get anything. So instead of going very specific, I went the opposite direction and went very general. And I just searched the term Apache in the tribe field. This is a good reminder that even when you're a seasoned researcher, you always have to change your search tactics to match those of the parameters of the database in which you're searching. Once I just used the term Apache, I was able to get 3 results. So let's take a look at our results. So we have 3 entries. They all have similar names, but they're for different documents. So you'll notice that this first result is actually the ratified treaty. It's not the original treaty when it was first signed. It's actually gone through the process of ratification and is now enacted into law within the United States. We also have a cover sheet. The cover sheet will not have a lot of text on it, as it's only used as a protective cover for the actual treaty. It will usually only have a date and the name of the treaty, and possibly where the treaty was signed. Looking at the record for the cover sheet, we see that there's a link to the National Archives record. Using this link, we can view the scanned original document. Looking at the document, you can see the original handwriting. The paper is actually brown, thus the name. Moving out of the National Archives document and back into the IDA Treaties Explorer, let's look at the record. You'll notice that there's no creation date for this doc. That's because no creation date could be ascertained. Let's take a look at our original 3 results. You're going to want to look at the different identifiers that are listed from the National Archives. So one, this lets you know what the original source was for these documents. And it also lets you know that there are 3 different documents with very similar titles. In addition, you're going to note that they all have the same registered Indian treaty number 261. That lets you know that each of these documents is related to the same treaty. So you're not looking at documents from multiple treaties, you're looking at the same one. Let's take a look at the ratified Indian treaty. And here is the record that lays out what has been tracked and cataloged within this particular database. We have the title of the treaty again. We have alternate titles. So if you typed in Ratified Indian Treaty number 261 or RIT with a number or the pound symbol in the number, you would be able to retrieve the same document. There is a field for the National Archives identifier. This will take you out of the Treaties Explorer, which is a portal. So it's a door that you walk in, but then there are multiple doors that you can access into this one place. It's kind of like a mall for treaty shopping, right? You go into a mall, but you have different stores to choose from all at one place. This lets you know that this particular record that we're looking at is an entire unit. The creation date for the record is not here because there are multiple documents assigned to this record. And notice our results only had these 3 top documents and not this 4th document. Let's click through to view the Senate's advice and consent to treaty ratification. As we link back out to the National Archives database, let's think about the quality of the original documents we are viewing. Giving more people access to looking at the original documents is really important because otherwise you're reading history through very sanitized documents. They're all typed up and you've lost all of the character of the time. Looking at the handwriting, you can think back to the time that the document was written. You can think about the care and effort and thoughtfulness that went into creating these documents. And it creates for the researcher a true link to the past, and it makes it easier for you to understand historical context. You're not just reading typed up words, you're reading someone's handwriting. You're seeing the mark that, for some of you, your ancestors put on paper, and those marks and those agreements still affect us today. Think about the time it took to sit down and write out these documents. We see this is from March 23rd, 1853. It lets you know that 2/3 of the senators present advised that this document ratifies this particular treaty. At the time these treaties were being passed, there were many of them. So the language had to be very precise because there was no overall system of tracking the treaties easily. There were no databases, and no one had given any thought to creating some sort of archive to track all of these changes and approvals. So think of the work it took to pull these documents together, and this was done by the National Archives with the work of their researchers going through these handwritten documents and creating digital catalog records that eventually the IDA Treaty Explorer would be able to utilize to help you with your research. So a big thank you to all of those hardworking people at the National Archives. Let's head back to the IDA Treaties Explorer record. I'm going back and forth between databases. I have tabs popped open on my screen, but you can't see. Whenever you click on a National Archives link, you actually leave the IDA treaty database. You must go back to the tab that has the database open so that you can see the record that you're working with. Now that we're back in the IDA Treaties Explorer and looking at the record, you'll notice that there's a creation date. This date is related to this particular document, not the ratified treaty. If we click on the ratified treaty link, it takes us back to the page that lists all of the associated documents with ratified Treaty 261. Note here that there's a space for tribe names, and let's click on Apache, and it takes us to a map. And in this map you can see Arizona and New Mexico. And since we clicked on the name Apache, it's bringing up all of the treaties and sessions related to the name Apache. We will scroll down on the list to take a look at the treaties associated with the name Apache, as well as all the individual bands of Apache. But I want to first point out the blue areas that you see on the map in Arizona and New Mexico. These are individual sessions that took place, and you can tell that every time you scroll over one, you have a different session number. If we scroll down, you can see all of the names of the different Apache tribes and the session numbers that are associated with that particular tribe. If you keep scrolling down, you eventually hit the treaty section, and you'll notice the only treaty available here is 261. Now remember, not every single treaty that is in existence is in this database, only those in which an original scan has been found. As we scroll back to the top of the screen, notice the number of sessions that are listed here. And even though at the bottom you see the sessions are only associated with the tribal name Apache, as you get closer to the top, you'll notice that there are different bands or unique tribes. Also notice that the land area for these different Apache tribes are located in both Arizona and New Mexico. Let's go back and focus on the New Mexico session. This is session 448, and if you look at the map, you can see modern day roads in relationship to where the lands that were to be transferred or reserved for Indian tribes exist. Looking at this part of the record, you can see that the tribal name listed in historical documents was only listed under Apache. However, the present-day tribes have identified themselves into these different bands. If you move to the bottom of the screen, you can see that there are links to the map that we're looking at, which is New Mexico Map 2, as well as a link to the original map. Let's take a look at the historical document that is known as a session list. Well, you could definitely click on one of the tribal names. Instead, let's actually click on the resource that the session list will be coming from. Please notice that as we click the link to view the document, this time we do not leave the IDA Treaties Explorer. So this document has been uploaded and organized on our server. As we look closer at the document, pay attention to the fact that there are 3 pages. Please pay attention to the page numbers. In this case, the page number starts at 632, meaning if you laid your book flat, you would be starting on the right-hand side of the page. Session lists, however, read from left to right. In most cases, if you have a document that starts with a right page or an even page number, then you're going to want to look at the odd page number to make sure that you see the list in its entirety. At a session list laid open flat like a book, you can easily see how each entry reads from left to right across both pages. Before I go on, here is one of the attribution pop-ups that I told you would be coming. This one is an attribution to the Internet Archive. So let's scroll in and take a look at what's actually in a session list. As I noted earlier, if you focus in on some of these descriptions, not every single session is a transfer of land from an Indian tribe to the federal government. Some of these entries regard lands that were reserved for particular tribes. The entries will describe exactly what happened in a transfer of land. In particular, you can learn which Indian agents were responsible for negotiating these land transfers. In many cases, these sessions can describe subsequent changes that were made to different treaty documents. Before we even understand the general layout of a session list, just by looking at these entries, you can see the detailed information that is there regarding land transfers in both New Mexico and Utah. But before we get too far into the details, let's pull back and take a look at parts of the session list. This is the information that we were looking at in detail, and you can see that at the top of the page, there's a description about what information is in each column. As I stated earlier, in order to read a session entry properly, you must start with the left-hand or odd page. Otherwise, all of the interesting information that you're reading on the right side of the page will not make any sense. So let's move to the left side and take a look at the tops of the columns. There's a date field, where or how this particular session was concluded. The references here include executive orders, exact locations, or references to the statutes at large, where the enacted treaty was ultimately compiled. You will also see references to the historical names of tribes, a description of the ceded or reserved lands, and also contextual historical remarks that give you more information surrounding the land transfer. In addition, you can correlate the session number as well as the map location that we can correlate to the record in the IDA database. Let's take a moment to step out of the document and go back to the record in the database. And here we can see the correlation to the session number 448 on the map. The original intent of this search was to look for any treaties affiliated with the Mescalero Apache tribe. Going back to the results screen, I select tribes in the orange box. Notice that as soon as I start typing Apache in the search box, I don't even have to complete it. I am already receiving results for the term Apache. Notice here there is a reference to Eastern Apaches. If we click on it and look at the map, you'll notice that the references to the Eastern Apaches deal with lands to the east of the Rio Grande. Looking at the map, you can see that the Apache Eastern bands were tribes located in southern Colorado, the eastern half of New Mexico, and into eastern parts of Texas. If you scroll down the page, you can see all of the different bands of Apache tribes there are, and we see that Session 448 is associated with the Oklahoma Apache bands. Even though this band eventually identified itself as an Oklahoma band, notice that the session was located within the bounds of New Mexico. So if we magnify on the map, we can see that the session that is in question is located to the east of Albuquerque, the west of Clovis, and north of Roswell. To reiterate, session number 448 is historically affiliated with these present-day Apache bands. The information about the maps indicates the land base depicted in the map was derived from historic map number 2. While the map is not as detailed as some would like, having this information available makes it easy for the researcher to understand what land bases are being transferred and compare them to current maps. Now that we have searched and identified the different parts of a session, let's take a look at the information that can be derived for session number 448. As we link into the document, you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, there are navigational buttons so that you can look at one page at a time, 2 pages, or multiple pages of a session list. However, because the text is so small, I would recommend that you look at the page layout where it looks like an open book. Again, this is because you have to read a session entry from left to right, beginning with the left-hand page. For this particular session number, starting from the left-hand part of the screen, we move across the page and we can see all of the information pertaining to the session that we're looking for. Any one of these data points can be used to verify that we're looking at the correct information, whether it is a session number, an indication of what map the session number is supposed to be in, the date of the session, even what type of action was completed, whether it was an executive order or an enacted treaty. So let's look at the very first treaty in the database, the ratified Treaty of the Five Nations, dated August 14th, 1722. Clicking on the link, you can see again we have not left the Treaties Explorer. That means that this treaty is directly on our server, and you do not need an external database to look at the document. However, if we go back, you can also see the National Archives identifier number. If we click on this number, we are taken out of the Treaties Explorer and taken to the National Archives catalog. Let's stay within the IDA Treaties Explorer just so that we can see the functionality of this resource. Scrolling in on the first document page, you can see this is a title page, Indian Treaty Series Number 1, Treaty between the Governors of New York, Virginia, and Pennsylvania and the Five Nations, August 14th, 1722. There's also a note that states the conference was held at Fort George in New York and the subsequent Indian treaties thereon, and this is a certified copy. More information is given on the second page. The type pages of this document were created much later as an identifying resource for the original treaty. Let's take a moment to look at the treaty itself. At this point, I can either use my mouse to zoom in on the document so that I can read it better, or I can use the navigation buttons on the left-hand side of the screen. Here, I'm going to click the plus sign so that I can zoom in. If you zoom in too close, you can zoom out using the minus button. The next button is actually a rotation button in case the document was loaded on its side. Zooming in this close, you can see the handwriting. You can see how the aged paper has changed color. The ink, while still legible, has faded a bit. Looking closely, you can also see the defects in the paper. There is a line here that is fading, but you can tell that this is an original document. While reading handwritten text might be challenging, to be able to see errors in the original writing and not the sanitized copy of retyped words, you as a researcher can really delve into these historical documents and bring history to life. Let's use another navigational tool that this database offers. You do have a number of navigational tools to go from page to page. We can also change our view to a gallery view in which we see multiple pages at one time. At this time, though, I want to go to the last page. If I wanted to see the signature page of the tribal leaders, remember that I would not go to the last page of this treaty. This is the ratified Indian Treaty, so the last page will likely have United States government officials. Let's take a look at that now. As you can see, the last page signature is from a government official. Looking at this last page, you can see that both sides of the paper were used, and you can see the text from the other side of the page bleeding through. Let's take the time now to look for the signature page indicating who the parties were who signed on the behalf of Indian tribes. You will notice that with this document and others loaded onto this database, it looks like the number of pages is 122. However, if you look more closely, there are duplicate scans of the same page. So, instead of 122 pages to peruse, you really only have 61 pages. To conduct this type of search, I would suggest that you employ the multiple page view. This way you can review a number of pages at the same time, particularly because we are looking at duplicate pages. You should be able to easily identify signatures from a distance, and then focus in on those pages. Let's return to the multi-page view to see if we can identify any treaties from a distance. Looking at these pages, it does not appear that there are any marks from any Indigenous leaders. This is not an unusual occurrence, however, particularly in these early treaties. If we scroll up, let's see if we can find a page that possibly has an account of what a tribal elder said. Here's one. If the marks of Indigenous leaders are missing from treaties, then there is usually some sort of transcription of what that leader said or agreed to during the negotiations or the signing of the treaty. In this case, we have Brother Corlea. Above his name it says, "The further answer of the Five Nations to His Excellency's propositions." This gives us an indication that it was the other sovereign that reached out to create this treaty. But to know for sure, you would have to read the treaty in full. If I wanted to download or print this particular page, I can easily do so with the buttons on the bottom left hand of the screen. If I wanted to download, I could click this button and I can download the entire image, only the current view, or the whole image easily. In addition, I could share this link to a fellow researcher or even embed this link on a web page. There is one more area of the website that we need to explore. It is the Places link. This is the most dynamic area of the website, and I think everyone will enjoy it. It's a real crowd pleaser. As you can see, what is loaded is a map of the United States. There are areas and states that are missing the red boundary lines that indicate either treaty or sessions that took place. You can see the blue outline of the states. In the areas that don't have any treaty or session lines, that's because no treaties have been found between those indigenous tribes and the United States and loaded onto the web portal. As we find more treaties and load them, these areas will fill in. You can see here that you have the options of viewing just the states or just the sessions. Let's take out the sessions and look at the United States. Now, let's add the sessions back. And take out the states. The other wonderful feature of this website is you can actually put in your local zip code and the map will reorient to your location. Neighborhoods come up and you can choose the neighborhood that most fits your area. Now you saw some international addresses, but there aren't going to be any treaties or session documents associated with those areas because they're not a part of the United States. Looking at the map, we can see Albuquerque and the surrounding areas. We can scroll over these individual places, and again we go back to those session numbers that we're now so familiar with. So if we click on the session number, I think you know where to go to from here. Let's go back to the main page to end our tour. We've done a lot and seen a lot, but how do we keep track of our treaty research? Best practices in research say that you should track your research. Tracking the type of information you're looking for is part of best practices. But remember, you might start out looking for a treaty, but end up having to look at a session list, looking for an executive order, or a statutes at large citation. You may even end up having to find an international treaty. Tracking where you've conducted your research will help you become more efficient. This includes keeping track of websites that you have visited, key terms that you have used, books, files, or any archive or library that you've attended. This helps you see where you've been in your research and also helps you strategize your next steps. Logging every research session will help you avoid doing duplicative work. And in addition, it will help you share your work with colleagues or clarify any questions that you might need to ask an expert. You can easily recall any documents or places that you've already searched. As you are tracking where you have conducted your research, as well as the resources that you have consulted, it would benefit you to also track what information you have found in each resource or at each place. This will help you identify any lost documents and also help you recall any items that maybe you did not have time to review or that you know that you have to come back for. It's very rare that you have the luxury of completing all of your research in one session, particularly when you're researching something as in-depth and complex as treaties. My advice is at the end of every research session, you take the time to summarize what you were able to accomplish in that research session and also write a plan for your next one. This will save you time when you come back to your research after being away from it a while. All of these tips will help you with research generally, but when it comes to treaties, I have a few more. Whenever you find information on a treaty that you think is on point, make sure that you track the information that you need to further your research. You might need to update an original treaty with a statute, so make sure that you keep track of this key information. The type of document that you're searching, whether it's a session on a session list, a statutes at large, citation, or an executive order, the name of the document, the date, the name of the tribe and the spelling of the tribe, any other citations, and brief description of what you're looking for and why you want it. If you're doing online research, make sure to set up your search tabs. Have a tab open for every database that you're going to need. If you're able to employ all of these tips as you are researching, you will definitely become more efficient. Unfortunately, there are no shortcuts to good research. So make sure that you take your time, be meticulous, ask good questions, and above all else, make sure you write it down or type it or however it is that you keep track of your research. Just like in the other sessions, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's take a moment to remind ourselves why you decide to subject yourself to all of this information. You're looking for searching tips to use when conducting research with the Indigenous Digital Archives Treaties Explorer web portal, available at DigiTreaties.org. To help you sift through all of the information I've just presented to you, and to help you get started researching on DigiTreaties.org as soon as possible, here are some quick searching tips. When searching the treaties portion of the website, search in the title field. When searching in the sessions portion, make sure to make note of any references regarding executive orders and statutes at large, just in case you need to do further research. When searching the tribes portion, remember you can use the federally recognized names of tribes, but also remember that the names used in that portion may not be the names the tribes prefer to use for themselves. And lastly, make sure you check out the places portion of the website. Enter your zip code or any zip code that is covered in the map that we looked at to see what land cessions are in your area. Thank you all so much for viewing this workshop. It was an honor and pleasure to be able to present this information to you and introduce you to searching techniques to use the IDA Treaties web portal, also known as DigiTreaties.org. Thank you and happy researching.